Berg Knowles Theory podcast.
All right, everybody, welcome to the Berg Knowles Theory podcast, where we discuss AI and how you can actually use it. Our goal is to ensure that you, our listener, have the tools, knowledge, and understanding to leverage AI to simplify and automate areas of your life or business. I'm Ian Knowles, and I'm here with our main man, Harry Berg, the AI expert. And on today's episode, we're going to be talking about RAG systems, otherwise known as retrieval augmented generation systems, which are effectively retrieval-based, generation-based methods to enhance the quality and relevance of AI-generated text. So a lot of words there, but RAG systems are critical components to AI and important to understand. So let's dive into it. Harry, what's a RAG system?
Absolutely. Let's break it down. So to kind of think about, why you might want to have one of these RAG systems. Imagine you're a business and you want to create like an internal support bot, or maybe an external facing customer support bot. It can talk to your customers. It can tell them about your products. It can tell them about your policies. To do that, you're not going to be able to rely just on the general purpose AI out there like GPT, which powers ChatGPT, because it doesn't have that information. It's not aware of your policies. These documents might be private, or they might be very recent, and so it's not going to have that knowledge. It's not going to be able to answer questions from your customers or your team about those things. So somehow you want to provide those documents to these systems so that they can include the relevant and accurate information in their responses when they are having these conversations in this example. So you might have all of your, like I said, all of your internal docs about your policies. You want your AI to be able to talk about those things. So you want to create what we call a knowledge base, which is like a collection of all of these documents is the example I'm giving, but it could also be other format of media. I don't know, like images, etc. Although by far the most common thing is text-based knowledge. You want to build up this knowledge base and you want to give it to your AI system so that it can look up knowledge in that knowledge base and incorporate it into its responses. So it might be something like customer asks, what's your return policy? And it can provide the right information instead of making something up, which we call a hallucination, which we can also talk about in this episode. So at a high level, that's what these RAG systems allow you to do. They allow you to generate, that's the G in RAG, they allow you to generate responses, which are augmented by retrieving this information. So you pull in that information, you retrieve it to augment the responses so they contain the relevant information and generate that response as you usually get from ChatGPT when you give it a prompt. And these could, I haven't thought too much about it, but these could probably also be applied in the non-language model cases. But I think what we're going to talk about mainly today is language models that are providing you text or voice responses and how they generate that content in the text.
Right. And so RAG systems are a critical component to co-pilots, chatbots, even search. I mean, the most obvious RAG system usage at the highest level is probably Google, I would imagine. And that when you're typing in something to Google, Google's then kind of scraping the internet to pull forward a response by querying snippets of articles and websites and et cetera. So it sort of allows the database to be to mobilize in a way to provide the response to your query.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. I mean, as we mentioned before, there are many products we use every day which have been around for decades, way before this technology existed. But especially recently, I imagine more and more of them are becoming dependent or even built upon language models and technologies like retrieval augmented generation systems. And this is going to be an exciting episode because so many times throughout the podcast so far, you've mentioned, Ian, about are these AI systems pulling in information somewhere? And I've basically said, no, again and again. That's not how they work fundamentally. But RAG is what does allow them to do that when it's needed. Kind of look up the information and pull it in. So yeah, you're exactly right.
Right. The LLM is not the thing that's pulling the information. It's actually the RAG system that's doing that work.
Yes, or even more specifically, as we've mentioned before, it's the LLM which decides to perform an action or call a function or use a tool. We would say one of those three things. It it generates that function call instead of generating a response. And that function call is something like use the RAG system to look up this information. It pulls that information in and then it uses that to generate the response. So that is exactly how that is working.
In practically speaking, where are RAG systems most used or most useful? Is it co-pilots, chatbots, search? Where do you see RAG systems? I mean, you don't see them per se, but you interact with them with or without knowing.
Yep.
Where are they most
Mm-hmm.
prevalent, and how do you see RAG systems sort of augmenting AI as we know it and contributing to the advancement of AI?
Yeah. So this is a very recent technology, within the last 2 years at most.
Right.
So I would say it's probably not everywhere yet, and maybe you're not using products that use these RAG systems on a day-to-day basis. But chatbots, I think, is really the clearest example of where these systems are, almost certainly used, because it's that case which
Mm-hmm.
I mentioned. You want to generate a response, you need to pull in information from a source of truth instead of hallucinating, confidently saying something which is made up, as these AI systems tend to do, which is one of their weaknesses. You want to pull in that information so that this chatbot can provide a relevant response, whether it's to talk about your product suite or your return policy, or to find information within your drive, these kind of things.
Right. So this is an interesting one for me because I think for a lot of people, um, technology is amazing. It's fantastic. It does beautiful things. In many ways, it's magical. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but what matters is really the user at the end of the day. How is the technology helping the user out? And when I think about chatbots or co-pilots, um, and how they ultimately can help me or us, the world. I always think about how does a let's say a co-pilot actually work, right? Let's say I have I've got a small business and I want to build a co-pilot that kind of helps me manage my day to day, so I can more easily retrieve documents, reports, data, and then work through that data through questions that I ask my co-pilot, and then it grabs that data, it provides a summary of it helps me navigate the vast expanse of data that all of us are working with on a given any given day. um, RAG systems are sort of the key to that, right? Like without the RAG system, it would be very difficult for these co-pilots, which I think you and I both believe will become you know very commonplace in the future, where like everybody will have a co-pilot of some kind that helps them kind of navigate the sea of data that they have to navigate on a daily basis. It would be very difficult for us to have that human computer interaction of any value without RAG systems interfacing or serving as a bridge between ourselves and the data.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I'd say there is a level of it where we can all benefit quite massively, in fact, from the general purpose knowledge systems like ChatGPT, which already have a lot of knowledge about the world baked in. So they can answer questions in the same way you would want to use a search engine and that sort of thing. But then there's this level beyond that, which is, in my opinion, clearly the direction we're going is that these AI systems will be more tied to us as individuals or organizations and be able to make use of relevant information. So I think RAG is really going to unlock the next level of productivity, of usefulness of these AI systems. Absolutely.
In a way, it's almost like I sent you that article, as I was kind of going through, a bunch of research this morning, and there's this evolution in SaaS right now, where you've got historically SaaS has been dominated by horizontal players like the Salesforces of the world. The future is seeming like it will be dominated by at least in the aggregate, by niche players, more vertical SaaS players. And it seems like there's
Yeah. Interesting
an
point.
iteration that's taking place right now where the way that I think about it in my head is like micro vertical SaaS, which is super specific technology specifically for you, right? Or specifically for your company.
Yeah.
And in these tools, brand new RAG systems will allow that to really be possible, whether you're using it for yourself as kind of a personal co-pilot, or if you own a small business and you want an assistant of some kind that can, help you navigate and manage your business.
Yeah. So, you keep seeing these things like GPT for law or GPT for healthcare or GPT for X, right? And those products are probably not custom models trained from scratch on that domain specific data, because that would be very expensive to do. It requires a lot of machine learning expertise. It requires infrastructure, the kind of things which just the likes of Google, Meta, OpenAI have access to. And so, one question is, well, how would you build a system which is domain specific without whilst obviating that necessity, that really huge burden? And one approach would be creating your own model from scratch, which I just described. Another would be fine tuning an existing model, adjusting the strength of connections in that digital brain so that it produces response more likely to your domain. But again, that requires training and expertise. And an easier way to do that in most cases is just include the information in your prompt, right? So you could dump, copy and paste your entire user manual into the starting prompt, or what you'd call the system message for these large language models, so that they have that context. But you don't want to copy and paste it every time, and maybe there's too much content to fit into that prompt, because the prompt can only be a maximum size currently. So instead, what you could do is you could attach this knowledge base and access it with a RAG system. And so you would make prompts to the language model, and it would say, okay, it seems like I need a little bit more information here. I'm going to, instead of directly providing a response, I'm going to choose to use a tool, call an action, use a function call, which is a request to this RAG system, which does a lookup for the most relevant data. And then it kind of behind the scenes, the software copies out the relevant text and puts that into the prompt for you. That's how these RAG systems are doing what they're doing. And by doing that, you can achieve these kind of domain-specific models, because you can just have a knowledge base full of domain-specific context and pull that into the initial prompts, so that it's just part of the input for these language models when they make a response. Discussed before, just for a recap, AI systems, the AI is really at the heart of it just this thing which takes an input and makes a prediction, such as an input prompt and a prediction of a response. And so the question is, does it have all the relevant information in that input? You don't necessarily have the resources to train a model from scratch or to fine-tune a model, so you can use a RAG system to pull in the relevant text data into that input before it's processed by this big digital brain, such as GPT, to produce a response.
So on our last episode, we talked about APIs. And I think if you're not familiar with all this terminology, you might, and you listen to our last episode, you might ask yourself, well, what's the difference between, a RAG system and an API? So I want to clarify that, because these are two fundamentally different functions, different tools that, in a lot of ways work together, but have different uses.
Yeah, absolutely. So, the short definition of an API, which we discussed it at length in the previous episode, was some software which is listening for requests, such as give me a response to this prompt. And inside that API, there is some software which runs, which is completely up to the developer what software that is. And the API, at the end of the day, returns a response. In that example, it would be the response to your prompt. And so the RAG system lives inside that software. This is part of, like I said, the developer can choose whatever software runs when the API receives the request before it returns a response. And in this case, when the software runs, it might have a step which is like use a RAG system to pull in more relevant context before giving that to an AI system, the output is then what's returned by the API. Yeah.
So the RAG system is embedded in the API.
Yeah, it's part of the software, which is inside
Mhm.
inside the API. Kind of that would the RAG system, would just be another bunch of lines of code running on the computer in OpenAI's data center or in your own product's server, which then the API would send back as a response. And so again,
And
one of the reasons why we use APIs is for security. You don't want to give all this information over to the user. You probably don't want to don't want them to have access to it on their device, or maybe it's just a lot of data, so they don't need to. And so you can keep that all separate and away on your own server, and access that with the internal software before sending it back to the
Mhm.
user.
And from your perspective, why are RAG systems important for people to know about? I mean, it's a burgeoning study in many ways.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of very smart PhDs working on the on the science of RAG systems right now. But as you mentioned, and I just said it's still it's only a couple of years old. I mean, we're kind of developing
Mm-hmm.
this technology now.
Yeah.
Why is it important, and where do you see it ultimately going?
I would say that the main importance of these RAG systems is the is the reason I discussed for creating domain specific models. You want to have something which knows everything about the industry you work in, and so you can effectively use a RAG system to pull in the right pieces of that knowledge base into the input prompt before you process it with a off the shelf model like GPT-4.
And it seems to me that in the world of widespread entrepreneurship, where a lot of people are moving towards being a solopreneur, domain expertise is obviously important.
Yeah.
And having tools that allow you to do more with less will ultimately benefit that path. Is it right to assume that technologies that employ RAG systems will aid in the advancement of the solopreneur?
I think to that point of domain expertise potentially being a moat in the era of AI, something defensible, yes, because you might be the only team that has the founders that have that knowledge that can put it into the knowledge base, or you might be
Right.
the only team that has run this process for long enough that you've developed some proprietary step-by-step way to approach things, which again is part of what you could put in the knowledge base. So it doesn't have to just be, this is a good point that you bring up here, Ian. It doesn't just have to be information. It doesn't just have to be factual about, what is our
Right.
product suite, what's our return policy, but it could be things about, what's the right way to go about helping this user? What's the step-by-step process that we use internally? Not that you would show that information in the response, but that it's still useful to have in the prompt for the language model to access so that it knows, what's the next question I should ask, or is there any gaps which I need to fill in here?
Right. Yeah, I think it was Mark Cuban who said AI is not going to take your job. People who use AI will take your job. And
Yeah.
people and I think implied there is people who understand AI, who've built out systems to advance themselves beyond the point of which people have gotten to who do not use AI, right? Who do
Yeah.
not use these tools, who have not educated
Mm-hmm.
themselves on what they are, how they work, and how they can ultimately be applied to, to business, to entrepreneurship, et cetera.
Yeah. So to give a bit of game to our listeners here, insider pro tips is, we talk about these RAG systems as if they're these very complicated things. They sound hard to use. Actually, they're really not. If you have an OpenAI ChatGPT Plus account, then you can really easily access this technology by building a custom GPT. And in the configuration screen, scroll down, there's a section for knowledge base. You can upload a bunch of your documents there. And really, that's all you need to do. Then when you use this custom GPT, it's going to be able to access that information as and when it thinks it's relevant. So it's not just something that we're talking about for intellectual curiosity, or not just something that we're discussing for machine learning engineers. It's something that everybody listening to this could, and I would recommend should, be using. You can create these custom GPTs to help with your everyday tasks, like you mentioned earlier, Ian. Accessing the files in your drive, even just accessing your notes or your previous blog posts you've written as you want to brainstorm the next one, or accessing your emails, maybe you do that in a slightly different way, but it's something that the everyday person can use. And if they want to be someone who's AI enabled as an AI front runner, then that's what I'd recommend to do. Get that ChatGPT Plus subscription for $20 a month, build a custom GPT, and give it the ability to access your knowledge base.
Disclaimer: we are not getting paid by OpenAI.
I wish we were.
That is a genuine recommendation. Both Harry and I use it.
Mhm.
What is exciting to me about this is, I obviously work with a lot of different businesses in a number of different industries. And, one complaint that everybody has is the amount of time that people spend searching for documents, searching for data, trying to get reports done. Even with the tech that's out there right now, it's still not seamless. There's still a lot of manual entry. There's still a lot of like back and forth, right? Multiple steps. It's not one click. It's not sort of search function result. And I'm excited about a world where I can, on my phone, or other business leaders on their phone can type in to their own chatbot or Copilot, what is my best selling product over the last 2 weeks? And there's a report. What's my highest margin product, right? Or even more sophisticated than that, generate me a report that has my highest selling products by SKU, by channel over the last 6 months, and it generates me a report. That doesn't right now. There are tools that get close to that sort of, right, but it still requires a lot of clicking and a lot of adjusting, and there's a lot of steps in that process. It seems
absolutely.
to me that we're getting pretty close to my dream coming true with that, with RAG systems specifically, because they're the ones that really can deliver that, or help to deliver it, and then everything else we obviously are talking about here too contribute to that vision potentially becoming a reality at some point.
Maybe one thing to differentiate between here is two features of custom GPTs, which we've talked about previously. So to separate out RAG systems from actions. So, RAG systems being this, you upload a knowledge base, you can pull in parts of that knowledge base into your input prompt or behind the scenes that happened. And actions where your GPTs can access the tools which you use on an everyday basis, like Google Drive or YouTube or Shopify, whatever it is. They can make requests to that system and then pull in information in a similar way. And so, I think both of these things in some ways can be used to a same effect. You could upload, all of your recent product data to a RAG system and have the GPT, access that information through RAG, or you could give your GPT access to the Shopify action, which has all of these different things that the Shopify API can do, list products, get your analytics, whatever it is. And then again, that action, the result of that is some data is returned, which the GPT can process in its which can pull into its prompt to process to produce a response. So those two things, they can be used in a similar way. I guess one thing to differentiate is that you can't use a RAG. Let's say you just had like a big spreadsheet of loads of numbers, whatever they were, like business metrics. What a RAG system is doing is it's like looking for certain pieces of the knowledge base based on like what the content is, like what words are there effectively. And so those numbers, they're not going to have the representations that words have. So a RAG system would be better at pulling in knowledge, like factual, facts from a knowledge base, because when those sentences are written in the documents in the knowledge base, it can understand those and it can pull them in. Where RAG system might struggle there because simply because that text representation, which is what you want to look up, isn't there in those numbers. Whereas if the GPT knows, hey, I've got access to a function, which is Shopify's get metrics function, then it can see that description of that function. This function will get you the metrics for all of your products, including SKU information and whatever. and it knows that that function is going to return that data. So you might want to use those two things a little bit separately. I'd say the case that you're talking about, if you want to ask questions about data which is in the products which you're using, I think the Shopify product sales example is a good one here. It'll probably make sense to create an action for that, a function definition which the GPT can call to get that data, as opposed to, saving those files with the data in a knowledge base. Another limitation would be that if you put it in the knowledge base, you'd have to continually update that knowledge base. You'd have to delete the old files, get the new file, put it in. You might have just as much clicking around as you would in the first place. But you could, of course, create an automation for that. But, two different approaches there.
Yeah, I think the solution would be to create an automation so that that the data is just automatically pulled through an API from the data source itself. Like Spotify, there's real time, all that stuff is happening in real time, and you can download a CSV or an Excel sheet that spits out a report if you want, but it's all there in real time, right? Same thing with like social media analytics.
You could just take the shortcut. You could just give it an action, which is, here's the function to call, which will get you that data. So I think an action would be more appropriate in that case. Yeah, exactly. So you wouldn't be putting it in your knowledge base. You'd just be telling your GPT, here's where you can make a request to the Shopify or the Spotify API and pull in the data. Yeah.
Anti-manual work.
That's right. Exactly. We're here to automate your lives and help you understand this stuff so you don't have to click around.
Yeah, we're on mission for one click.
Exactly.
Cut down
the future,
clicks.
Exactly. The future that we keep talking about is that, in the future, we will all interact with AI systems more and more like we interact with humans through text messaging or through conversational interface. And this stuff, what usually takes you to click around your dashboard on whatever product it is you want the analytics from, that will be done by the AI effectively as an employee in the background.
Yeah. Yeah, like I think it'd be very cool, going back to my last point about having this, co-pilot tool for CEOs. If there was, if I had a CEO avatar that I could, co-pilot avatar that I could text with, right? I'll call him Bruce. And I could say, hey, Bruce, what's my best-selling product over the last year? Or, hey, Bruce, who's my highest performing employee? Or, hey, Bruce, where am I losing the most money right now? Right. And Bruce was able to pull from all of these disparate data sources that, as they naturally are, maybe it's my ERP system, maybe it's my, marketing account, maybe it's my social media management account, etc. Maybe it's my, my QuickBooks, whatever it is. All that information is generally up to speed, at least within the last couple of hours, in some cases, maybe a few days, but it's not me having to manually plug in data from some period of time to then keep that response relevant, right? That's the dream that I have. One day that will exist.
Yes, we will make it. Again, I keep saying that, and we're actually going to build it one day.
Yeah, we come up with good ideas on this podcast.
Yeah, people should go and build them, or else we will, and you'll catch us soon. 10 episodes down the line, we'll be saying buy this product. I think so. Let's talk about the technical implementation here of how these RAG systems work. I think this would be a good cap to the episode. So, I've kind of described at a high level. Somehow the GPT is saying, well, here's the prompt from the user, and it's going to access this knowledge base. But how does that happen? So I'm going to use a concept that we talked about previously here, which was the embedding. Ian, can you remember what the embedding was and share that with our audience?
The embedding of the RAG system in the API?
So the embedding of really any piece of content. In this case, it will be, sentences in the knowledge base.
Embedding, repeat the question.
So remember a few episodes I described like the coordinates on a map for like representing a piece of, a TikTok or a user. And in the same way, we can build representations of the pieces of this knowledge base. So I'll cut this bit out of the podcast and you can like, we can edit it so you jump straight in with the answer. But basically what I'm getting at is you can take each sentence or each document in the knowledge base and turn that into a set of coordinates. And then you have this map of like, okay, where on the map is the prompt and where in the and which pieces of the knowledge base are close to the prompt on that same map. That's the content which will pull into the prompt to combine it with the original prompt from the user.
I'm not going to be able to say that as eloquently as you did.
Cool. I'll go straight in with it. So I guess what we want to figure out is how do these RAG systems, what I want to talk about is how do these RAG systems know what content to pull in from the knowledge base? How does that work technically? So what happens is you give the language model a prompt, and as always, because these AI systems are just mathematical functions, you need to somehow turn that prompt into numbers and then feed it through that equation. So we take this prompt and we turn it into an embedding or a vector representation, we call it. You can think of it like coordinates on a map. So if you have, X coordinate and a Y coordinate, which is your map, at some point on that map lies your prompt. There's it sits there as it's got coordinates on that map. Different prompts will contain different information. It will be very different, and so they will be at different places on that map. Similar prompts, similar pieces of text I'm talking about, will have similar coordinates. And so just as we turn our input prompt into a set of coordinates on this map, an embedding, a vector representation, an arrow from 0 coordinate to that coordinate on the map, just as we turn our prompt into those set of coordinates, we can turn every piece of text in our knowledge base, let's say every sentence, or it could be a whole document, or every paragraph, we can turn those paragraphs into coordinates on that same map. So when you give the GPT a prompt, it says, where does that prompt lie on this map? And then it looks at the knowledge base and it says, which pieces of information in the knowledge base are also close to those same coordinates? Because they're probably the similar information we need to pull in. So if your prompt is, what's your return policy? It's going to look through the knowledge base, which contains lots of things, maybe hundreds of different documents, but one of them is talking about return policy. And so it sees that return policy in the prompt, and it represents that original prompt, which you asked the question in, where, what is your return policy? It puts that on the map somewhere, and it says, now I've got this knowledge base. There's all these different hundreds of documents over this map, but one of them contains the return policy. It's going to have similar coordinates on that map. It's going to have a similar embedding. And so what a RAG system does is it looks for the nearest relevant pieces of the knowledge base, looks for the nearest coordinates, and it says, right, these things are probably relevant to providing this response. So it pulls those in, and at the end of the day, even though we've represented them as this set of coordinates, it turns them back into text, and it adds that text to your original prompt. So then, behind the scenes, you've got the message that you sent to ChatGPT, for example, plus piece of knowledge 1, piece of knowledge 2, piece of knowledge 3, which were within a certain distance of representation on that map. And so what's actually processed by the AI system is not just your original prompt. It's your prompt plus the knowledge pulled in by the RAG system. And then that is passed through the AI brain, the GPT, the AI model, to generate a response. But it has all the relevant context now from the knowledge base.
Would AI technology be as useful as it is without RAG systems?
There's certainly a lot of things which can be done. The AI brain, its connections still understand lots of things about the world. That's why ChatGPT can answer questions about all sorts of things without having that particular information. But it's not going to be able to talk about, your company documents or your personal files without these RAG systems, unless you literally, paste all of them into the prompt as well,
right?
Or you use an action to achieve the same thing.
So RAG systems really are what afford the user domain expertise or specificity on a subject matter or a data set.
It's a good approach to it. Yeah. It's, in contrast with training your own model from scratch, which would be very expensive, require a lot of infrastructure, require a lot of expertise. So that would be approach number one. Approach number two would be fine-tuning an existing model. You take something like Llama off the shelf, Facebook's open source AI brain, and then you continue to retrain it to adjust the strength of connections in that digital brain so that it's better at predicting the types of words which appear in your domain. Maybe it's the healthcare domain or some obscure scientific domain where those words don't frequently come up during the training of that foundation model Llama. But again, that would require a lot of infrastructure. It would require machine learning expertise, and it can be cumbersome to do. And so RAG is an alternative, which is very easy to do, low code. Just get an OpenAI Plus subscription, create a custom GPT, pull in the files. All of this stuff will happen in the background, and your GPT will be able to pull in relevant context from that knowledge base to provide responses which are informed by this domain specific knowledge. That's exactly right.
So would it be fair to say that effectively RAG systems optimize the output of LLMs?
I would say maybe optimize is a bit too generous of a term, but I would say inform. These RAG systems help to inform the responses. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. Well, that was a good dive into RAG systems. Really interesting stuff. A lot more to talk about on it, but I think that's a good place to wrap it up for the day. Anything else you want to jam on, Harry?
I think we can wrap that there. Keep it a nice, succinct episode as we're trying to do. Trying to make these episodes more digestible.
Yeah. I think that's a good place to call it. So as we do, we'll leave you guys with a quote. And today we've got a quote from the great Larry Page, and it goes something like this: "You need to get one thing done well, or else you don't have permission to do anything else." Which I think is a great one. A lot of times we have so much going on in our, specifically in our businesses, where we've got too many features, too many functions, or in our lives, kind of doing everything okay and not anything fantastic. Let's do fewer things, but better. I think it's a great quote. Great way to end the episode. Yeah. It's a great episode. Harry, you're the man. Thank you, everybody, for listening.
Cool. Yeah, you're the man. Thanks. We'll see you next time.
See you next time, guys.
The Berg Knows Theory Podcast.